Welcome back to Little English Studio, where we travel through time and across continents to explore the world's greatest stories in clear, simple English. Today we arrive at the eastern edge of Africa, where the warm breeze of the Indian Ocean carries the smell of salt, spice, and centuries of history. Here on the island of Mombasa in Kenya stands a fortress built from coral stone, a fortress that witnessed empires rise and fall, traders come and go, and cultures mix into something entirely new. This is Fort Jesus, the heart of the Swahili coast, a symbol of both conquest and coexistence, and one of the most fascinating World Heritage Sites in Africa. In the late 16th century, the world was changing fast. European powers were racing to control the sea routes to India and the spice-rich East. Portugal, one of the first maritime empires, had already reached the coast of Africa, establishing ports and trading stations along the way. Mombasa, with its deep natural harbour and central position on the Swahili coast, became a key target. In 1593, under the order of King Philip II of Spain, who was also King of Portugal at that time, construction began on a massive stone fortress to protect Portuguese interests and their route to India. The fort was designed by the Italian architect Giovanni Battista Cerati and named Fort Jesus, symbolizing faith and empire. Built from coral limestone taken from the very island it stands upon, the fort resembled a human body when viewed from above, a representation of the man who protects, endures, and watches over the city. Its walls were thick and its bastions strong, shaped like a cross to reflect the Christian symbol of protection. Fort Jesus was not only a military structure, but also a declaration, a statement that the Portuguese would defend their faith and trade in the name of Jesus. Long before the Portuguese arrived, the Swahili coast was already a flourishing world of trade and culture. From the 10th century, Arab, Persian, Indian, and African merchants exchanged gold, ivory, slaves, and spices along this coast, creating a unique blend of cultures known as Swahili civilization. Towns like Mombasa, Lamu, Kilwa, and Zanzibar were cosmopolitan centers where mosques stood beside coral houses, and the rhythm of dhows, traditional sailing ships, defined daily life. When Fort Jesus was built, it stood right at the center of this world. Its massive walls looked out over the harbour filled with Arab dhows, Indian traders, and African fishermen. Around it, the streets of old Mombasa twisted like narrow veins, alive with languages: Swahili, Arabic, Gujarati, Portuguese. Fort Jesus became more than a fortress. It became the meeting point of oceans, cultures, and empires. But the peace of Mombasa was short-lived. Fort Jesus would soon become one of the most fought-over places in all of Africa. Between 1593 and 1895, it changed hands at least 9 times, captured, lost, and recaptured by Portuguese, Arabs, Persians, and eventually the British. The first major siege came in 1696, when the Omani Arabs, rising as a new power in the Indian Ocean, surrounded the fort for almost 3 years. Inside, hundreds of Portuguese soldiers and civilians died of starvation and disease. In 1698, the Omani forces finally breached the walls. The red and white flag of Portugal fell, replaced by the green banner of Oman. The Omanis repaired and expanded the fortress, turning it into their stronghold on the Swahili coast. They ruled Mombasa for more than a century, establishing trade links from East Africa to Arabia and India. But the fort's control always reflected larger global rivalries: Portuguese vs. Arabs, Christianity versus Islam, Europe versus the Orient, all meeting in this one small harbour. By the 19th century, British interests began to dominate East Africa. In 1895, when Kenya became part of the British Protectorate, Fort Jesus once again changed hands, this time for the last time. Under British rule, Fort Jesus was converted into a prison, its coral walls echoing not with cannon fire but with the voices of prisoners. The cells that once held soldiers now held rebels, traders, and freedom fighters. Decade after decade, the fort remained a silent witness to the transformation of Kenya, from a colonial possession to an independent nation. After independence in 1963, Fort Jesus was finally opened to the public as a museum, allowing people to walk through its halls and understand their shared past. Inside, visitors can still see the marks of time: carvings in Swahili, Arabic inscriptions, cannonballs embedded in walls, and coral stones worn smooth by centuries of salt and rain. The fort's history became a mirror of Mombasa's, layered, painful, but ultimately resilient. Fort Jesus is considered one of the finest examples of 16th-century Portuguese military architecture outside Europe. Yet it is also uniquely African, built with coral limestone, designed to fit the tropical climate, and adapted by each power that ruled it. The fort's design follows a Renaissance style, with geometric symmetry, bastions named after saints and gun ports facing the sea. Its four main bastions, São Felipe, São Alberto, São Matthias and São Matias, still stand guard, facing the turquoise water of the Indian Ocean. The inner courtyard once housed a chapel, barracks, cisterns and an armory. Later, the Omanis added new elements: Arabic arches, carved wooden doors and decorative niches. They built domed cisterns and strengthened walls against cannon fire. When the British arrived, they modified the interiors for prison use. Thus, Fort Jesus became a living record of architectural dialogue, where every culture left its mark. Today, when sunlight touches the coral walls, the fort glows with a golden hue, as if the stones themselves remember every hand that shaped them. Around Fort Jesus stretches Old Town Mombasa, a labyrinth of narrow streets, whitewashed houses and carved wooden balconies. The city retains its Swahili character, where African rhythm meets Arab elegance and Indian color. The fort is the heart of this living heritage, and its presence still defines the identity of the coast. Every year, festivals and cultural programs are held in its courtyard, from traditional Swahili dances to international art exhibitions. The museum inside displays pottery, tools, cannons, shipwreck relics and manuscripts that trace the maritime history of the Indian Ocean world. For the people of Mombasa, Fort Jesus is not just a relic, it is a symbol of survival. It reminds them of how their ancestors endured conquest, adapted to change, and built a culture that belongs to no single empire but to humanity itself. In 2011, UNESCO inscribed Fort Jesus on the World Heritage List, recognizing it as a masterpiece of military architecture and a unique testimony to the cultural interaction between Europe, Africa and Arabia. Standing on the ramparts today, you can look out to the ocean and imagine the sails of Portuguese caravels, the dhows of Omani traders, the steamships of the British Empire, and the modern cargo ships that still pass through. The waves that crash against its walls are the same waves that carried explorers, enslaved people, merchants and dreamers. Fort Jesus reminds us that history is not just about war and power, it is about exchange, learning and endurance. It is the story of humanity written in coral and sea salt. And that was the story of Fort Jesus, the coral guardian of Mombasa, a fortress that stood for over 4 centuries, watching the tides of empire rise and fall. From Portuguese cannons to Omani prayers, from colonial prisons to freedom celebrations, this place holds the soul of the Swahili coast. Thank you for joining us on Little English Studio. If you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe, because every week we bring you more stories of our world's wonders, told in clear, beautiful English. Until next time, keep learning, keep exploring and keep believing in the power of history.